Hi, it's Katrina. Number 10. SOS signals. On April 15, 1972, Lloyd Detmer, the radio operator on the USS Theodore Roosevelt, picked up a very bizarre SOS signal. Through his headphones, Lloyd heard an indistinct, scratchy voice requesting help for the passengers and crew of the Titanic. The voice said it was in the middle of sinking. When Lloyd reported this to his superiors, he was ordered to ignore it because it was most likely a joke. But it didn't feel like a joke to Lloyd. He supposedly checked the military records of SOS signals and discovered that other radio operators had received the exact same signal from someone claiming to be on the Titanic. The signal was picked up in 1918, 1924, 1930, and again every 6 years. It also appeared that each radio operator had heard the voice of Captain Edward Smith, the first and last captain of the Titanic. The last reported SOS signal came in 1996. The Toronto Sun reported that a ship out of Quebec received the same mysterious Titanic SOS, but it supposedly hasn't been picked up since. No one knows if the souls of the victims have finally found peace, or if the ghostly captain has given up all hope. Number 9. The Titanic plot. When it comes to the sinking of the Titanic, almost everyone unanimously agrees it was an accident. Late in the evening on April 14, 1912, the RMS Titanic plowed into an iceberg and sank. Water flowed into the boat. There was a desperate attempt at escape, and soon the unsinkable ship was lost to the North Atlantic Ocean. Over 1,500 people, more than 2/3 of passengers and crew, were killed, resulting in one of the worst naval disasters in human history. But what if it wasn't an accident? There is a theory that millionaire banker J.P. Morgan plotted the sinking of the Titanic to kill off rival millionaires. Isidor Straus, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Jacob Astor were all rivals of the famous banker, and they all died on the ship. Even more curious, J.P. Morgan had made plans to sail on the Titanic, but then canceled his journey at the very last minute before the boat set sail. While the reason he gave for the cancellation of his trip was an illness, he was reported to be seen a few days later with his mistress, shopping in Europe. By all reports, he seemed in good health and his usual self. This theory is pretty far-fetched, but not entirely impossible. Straus, Astor, and Guggenheim were supposedly in opposition of the creation of the Federal Reserve, something which made J.P. Morgan incredibly rich. It's possible he needed a way to get rid of them and planned to sink a whole boat just to do it. Number 8. Message from a doomed passenger. A team of researchers is attempting to unravel a mystery from over 100 years ago. They have in their possession a letter which they believe was written by a young girl on the Titanic the evening before it sank. The message was allegedly discovered buried in the sand in the Bay of Fundy in New Brunswick, Canada, and was dated April 13, 1912. It was written in French and signed by Mathilde Lefebvre, who at the time was only 13 years old. Translated into English, the letter says, "I'm throwing this bottle into the sea in the middle of the Atlantic. We are due to arrive in New York in a few days. If anyone finds it, tell the Lefebvre family in Leuven." Thanks to historical records, we know this young girl did indeed exist, and she was a real passenger on the Titanic. She was from Pas-de-Calais, a passenger in 3rd class with her mother and 3 of her siblings. They were on their way to join Matilda's father, who had emigrated 2 years earlier. This is all according to the team investigating the letter from the University of Quebec. But is this an authentic letter or just an elaborate hoax? The team studied the chemical composition of the bottle, looked at the cork, scrutinized the paper, and even chemically analyzed the ink. The results of their tests showed that everything checks out, meaning the letter and the bottle were made from materials around the time of 1912. But here's where things get really confusing. This isn't the first time a letter has shown up claiming to be from the Titanic. The university is now studying the calligraphy itself to see if it matches with the way a 13-year-old French girl would write in 1912. They also felt that the ocean currents would have brought anything from the Titanic to the eastern shores of Canada. Even though the letter appears to be legit, from the ink to the paper, the research team still hasn't been able to prove its authenticity. Number 7. The Unknown Child. Just days after the Titanic sank, a Canadian morgue ship was dispatched to pick up the bodies. The sailors aboard the ship had the grim duty of pulling hundreds of frozen bodies out of the cold and unruly waters. Among the dead plucked out of the Atlantic was an infant boy. John Snow Jr., one of those aboard the morgue ship that day, told the Halifax Herald that the young boy came floating toward him with his face upturned. It was one of the most horrible things he had ever seen. They took the boy back to Halifax, but no one was able to identify him. The baby wasn't on the passenger list, didn't appear to be anyone's missing baby, and nobody knew where he came from. He was just a random baby from the Titanic, and his story was so moving that the sailors held a funeral service for him. The child was buried at a cemetery in Halifax. His tombstone is still there today, dedicated to the memory of the unknown child. But just wait, the child is no longer unknown. In 2008, the U.S. Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory in Maryland made a positive ID. The boy was Sidney Leslie Goodwin, 19 months old. He was the youngest son of Frederick and Augusta Goodwin, a couple who had been sailing from England with their 6 children to start a new life in New York. Sadly, none of them made it. Number 6. The Mystery Ship. The Titanic may not have been alone when it sank. A mysterious ship was spotted within view of the rapidly sinking Titanic, but never made any attempt to help. The ship, which was witnessed by multiple survivors, purposely moved away from the scene of the disaster and sailed off into the night as if it hadn't seen a thing. In the months following the horrific tragedy, the SS Californian was accused of being the mystery traitor. Its captain, Stanley Lord, was accused of abandoning the Titanic when it needed help the most. It wouldn't be for decades until the SS California and Stanley Lord were exonerated, but by then, the damage to his reputation had already been done. If it wasn't the SS Californian, then which ship left the Titanic and its passengers to their cruel fate? That's the riddle nobody's ever been able to solve. It wasn't the SS Californian because when the wreckage of the Titanic was found in 1985, it was clear the Californian had been about 20 miles away. There must have been another ship close enough to save some passengers, but unwilling to do anything. That ship's identity has never been found. Do you think the survivors saw a real ship or a ghost ship? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Number 5. The Mirage. An expert believes they have just discovered what really caused the Titanic to sink. Yes, it hit an iceberg, but now it looks like we might have a reason as to why. On the night of April 14th, nobody saw the iceberg straight ahead of the Titanic until it was too late. Ever since, there has been a lot of speculation as to how the iceberg was missed. How did not a single person spot the giant block of ice until the boat was already directly on it? Tim Malton, a historian from Britain, spent 6 years digging through survivor accounts of the disaster looking for the truth. What he discovered is that the ship likely sank because of an optical phenomenon called a mirage. This supposed mirage prevented the crew from seeing the iceberg, resulting in over 1,500 deaths. After the disaster happened, there were a lot of excuses thrown around. Some claimed the captain was drunk. Some said the rudder was too small, and some said the lack of binoculars was to blame. But Tim debunked all of these. The only logical explanation he could come up with was a mirage. Many survivors claimed it was the clearest night they had ever seen, and yet many other people claimed to see a haze hovering on the horizon. Tim believes that it was indeed an extremely clear night, with visibility upwards of 80 miles straight ahead over the ocean. This intense visibility caused a hazing effect as light scattered through the particles and people gazed into the dizzying distance. Then, because of the thermal inversion caused by the warmer air of the Gulf Stream, pushing the cold Atlantic air down against the surface of the ocean, the conflicting air and the haze created a lens bending the light. This obscured the lookout's vision, creating a dense mirage over the iceberg so that nobody saw it coming. Number 4. The Lost Locket. In April of 2022, the Titanic Museum attraction in Branson, Missouri, unveiled a lost locket from the Titanic. This small piece of jewelry is worth roughly $250,000. It was initially recovered from the vest pocket of Isidor Straus when his remains were pulled from the sea. Isidor Straus was a Jewish German immigrant and the co-founder of Macy's department store in 1888. He was also once a member of Congress and the first president of the Educational Alliance. He was a huge deal at the turn of the 20th century, one of the very first millionaire philanthropists in the United States. He and his wife Ida Straus died together on the Titanic after Ida refused to get on one of the lifeboats. She wouldn't leave her husband, saying where he went, she would go also. And so Isidor and Ida met their ends together in the icy waters. After this locket was found in Isidor's vest, it was handed over to the Straus family and remained in their possession until now. Number 3. Wreckage in 8K. In 2022, the Titanic was rediscovered in a most spectacular way. Just 40 years after the wreckage of the RMS Titanic was first discovered in 1985, we are finally getting a look at the shipwreck in astounding 8K quality. The ocean exploration team with Ocean Gate Expeditions went on a voyage to the bottom of the sea and filmed the Titanic in a way it's never been filmed before. They captured the ghostly wreckage in all its glory. By using the newest cameras and the most advanced technology, they were able to find bits and pieces of the structure that nobody had seen before. For example, they filmed the crane that was used for deploying the massive 15-ton anchor on the deck of the ship. They saw the shackle attached to the main mast before it collapsed. They were able to get sharp details of every single piece of the ship. They saw where the decay had started eating away at the metal. They even found the boilers that hit the ocean floor when the ship snapped in half. Big difference here is the technology. The shipwreck has been filmed plenty of times, but never like this. It's sitting at a depth of 12,415 feet, making visibility almost impossible. But filming the ship in 8K made a huge difference, like the difference between trying to put a puzzle together in the dark or with the lights on. Number 2. The Hero's Whistle. Harold Lowe has gone down in history as one of the real heroes of the Titanic disaster. Harold was in charge of lifeboat number 14 and spent every last ounce of energy he had paddling through the frigid waters looking for survivors. Harold was a natural leader. He gathered all the lifeboats together that he could, redistributed the survivors into a flotilla, and then used his own lifeboat to search for all the survivors he could find. Sadly, the water was too cold, and just about everyone was already dead. Harold only managed to find 4 men, and one of them died that night. Still, Harold chased the screams and cries through the black night in desperate search of anyone who might be alive. He was one of only 2 men who went back to where the ship had sank, hoping to save lives. Recently, Harold Lowe's whistle went up for sale. The whistle is engraved with Lieutenant H.G. Lowe, RNR, and most definitely belonged to the heroic lieutenant. It had an estimated value of $3,788 on its way to auction, but we don't know what it sold for in the end. We also don't know if this was the whistle Harold used that night as he searched desperately for survivors. It could have been, but nobody knows for sure. Number 1. Microbes and decay. In 2019, explorers with the DSV limiting factor made 5 dives to the wreckage of the Titanic and concluded that the ship is in a rapid state of deterioration. The discovery wasn't that surprising since the ship has been submerged for over 100 years. It was a little shocking, though, to see just how badly damaged the Titanic really is. Patrick LaHaye, one of the expedition members and the owner of Triton Submarines, said it was fascinating to see the Titanic being consumed by the ocean. Divers witnessed the Titanic being returned to its elemental form, every surface of metal in the midst of being rapidly consumed. They also discovered the famous ship is now home to a diverse number of sea creatures and is covered in microbes eating its hull. Sadly, the Titanic is in the final stages of its death. In all likelihood, the Titanic will be little more than some scraps of rust in just a few years. Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Bye!